and welcome to Live Parkinson's, Live an Exceptional Life. I'm Chris Custenbotter, and I've been living an exceptional life with Parkinson's for the past 15 years. And I want to help others living with Parkinson's to lead a great quality of life. Now, if you've ever wondered whether changing when you eat could actually help your brain and maybe your waistline, then you're not alone. After 15 years of living with Parkinson's, I've tried just about every nutrition strategy out there, but intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating. Well, these might be some of the most fascinating, misunderstood, and most talked about approaches in the news lately. Now, today we're going to cut through the noise and look at what science really says in plain English so that you can decide whether intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating is something that you want to ask your doctor about. Now, before we dive in, I want to provide this disclaimer that the information being provided is for informational purposes only and is based on my personal experiences and my research on this topic. Always consult with your healthcare professional before starting any new eating plan to ensure it's appropriate for your specific needs. All right, let's dive in and see what we can learn about intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating for Parkinson's. So, what exactly is intermittent fasting? Well, intermittent fasting is simply an eating pattern that cycles between periods of eating and periods of not eating. So, it's not about what you eat, it's about when you eat. Now, I want to be clear here. Intermittent fasting is not starvation. Think of it this way. Intermittent fasting is a choice. Starvation is a lack of choice. Intermittent fasting is like saying, I'm going to give my body a rest from food for a little while, and then I'll eat again later. You still get all the nutrition you need. You choose the timing. You're in control. Your body has enough stored energy to handle it, and you can stop at any time. It's structured, intentional, and flexible, like choosing to close the kitchen after 7 p.m., for instance. Now, starvation is the complete opposite. It's when your body doesn't have enough food or nutrients, and it's not by choice, like someone being held hostage against their will and not being fed, or just not having enough money for food. Starvation is a survival crisis. It's not a wellness strategy. All right, now back to intermittent fasting. Here are some of the most common patterns that are typically used by people that practice intermittent fasting. The first one is 16-8. And what that means is that you fast for 16 hours and then you eat in an 8-hour window. Then there's 14-10. You fast for 14 hours and you eat in 10. And then 12-12 is a general balanced approach where you fast for 12 and then you eat for 12 hours. Now, there's also alternate day fasting where you eat one day and you fast the next. And then there's OMAD, which is one meal a day. Now, people are drawn to these approaches because they're simple, structured, and they often help with your weight, blood sugar, and inflammation. All right, so then why are people with Parkinson's interested in this? Well, that's a great question. And the answer is actually pretty fascinating. Now, when we fast, the body flips a metabolic switch, and that switch activates several biological processes that scientists believe may, and that's the key word here, may, be relevant to Parkinson's. Now, we'll walk through them in a second after we define what time-restricted eating is. Now, time-restricted eating is a type of intermittent fasting where you eat all your meals within a specific window. Okay, so why are scientists interested in the metabolic switch with intermittent fasting? Let's look at some of the biological processes they're evaluating, and let's lead it off with a word that sounds complicated, but really isn't. And that word is autophagy. Now, think of autophagy as your brain's built-in housekeeping service. So here's what happens. All day long, our cells collect junk, damaged proteins, worn-out parts, and in Parkinson's, misfolded alpha-synuclein, the protein that clumps into Lewy bodies. Now, when we fast, the body says, hey, we're not digesting right now. Let's go clean up. Autophagy kicks in and starts breaking down and recycling all that cellular junk. So why does this matter for Parkinson's? Because alpha-synuclein buildup is one of the major troublemakers in PD. Research shows that fasting can activate autophagy, which may help clear out some of these harmful proteins before they pile up. So, in everyday terms, Intermittent fasting gives your brain a chance to tidy up the mess that contributes to Parkinson's. Okay, next up is ketones. Now, when you go several hours without eating, your body eventually runs low on glucose or blood sugar, and that's the natural fuel that we typically use to give us energy. So it switches to plan B, and that's burning fat. Now, when fat is burned, it produces ketones, which are like a premium gasoline for the brain. All right, so why does this matter? Well, Parkinson's affects the mitochondria, the power plants inside the neurons. Now, when mitochondria struggle, neurons don't get enough energy, and ketones provide a cleaner, more efficient fuel that stressed neurons may actually prefer. Now, one ketone in particular, beta hydroxybutyrate, does double duty. It fuels the brain, it reduces oxidative stress, and it supports healthier mitochondria. So essentially, ketones give your brain an energy boost when it needs it most, especially when Parkinson's makes energy production harder. Next up is inflammation and oxidative stress. And they're like a slow burning fire in the brain. And then Parkinson's pours gasoline on this fire. Now, fasting may help in two ways. First, to lower inflammation. When you fast, your body produces fewer inflammatory molecules. Now, this is important because inflammation can worsen neuron damage in PD. And second is oxidative stress. And that's really basically like rusting inside your cells. Damage caused by unstable molecules called free radicals. Fasting reduces this rusting process. Animal studies show that intermittent fasting can reduce brain inflammation, protect dopamine producing neurons, and improve motor symptoms. So, in everyday terms, fasting helps cool down the inflammation and oxidative stress that accelerates Parkinson's symptoms. All right, next is mitochondrial support. Now, as I mentioned earlier, mitochondria are the little tiny power plants inside your cells. Now, in Parkinson's, these power plants often break down and produce less energy. And fasting seems to help in two big ways. First, it boosts mitochondrial efficiency. The ketones from fasting help mitochondria work better and produce cleaner energy, and it stimulates new mitochondria. And this process is called mitochondriogenesis. So basically, your cells build new power plants. All right, now why does this matter? Because dopamine producing neurons are energy hungry. When their mitochondria fail, these neurons are the first to struggle. So, in simple terms, fasting helps your brain build stronger, healthier power plants that may help neurons that Parkinson's tries to damage. Finally, increased BDNF. And BDNF is the fertilizer for your brain. And BDNF stands for brain derived neurotrophic factor. But don't worry about the name. Just think of BDNF as the fertilizer for your neurons. BDNF helps neurons grow, survive, neurons to form new connections, and the brain to stay resilient under stress. And fasting is shown to increase BDNF levels, which is a big deal because people with Parkinson's often have lower levels of BDNF. Higher levels of BDNF may support learning and memory, improve your mood, and help protect vulnerable neurons. So, in simple terms, fasting may help your brain grow stronger, healthier connections, like watering a plant that's been struggling. Now, I want to be clear here. None of this means that intermittent fasting is a cure for Parkinson's or is it used as a treatment. But science is pointing towards some fascinating biological processes that could support brain health, and that's the key word, could support, better cleanup, better fuel, less inflammation, stronger mitochondria, and more BDNF. However, trials to support any recommendation for fasting in Parkinson's, we need to have larger clinical trials that show that fasting provides a benefit. Okay, so what does the research actually show regarding intermittent fasting for Parkinson's? Now, there's been some animal studies that were promising, showing that intermittent fasting protects dopamine-producing neurons, that it improved motor performance, and it slowed neurodegeneration. Now, these findings are exciting, but here's the key, they're in mice. They're not in humans. All right, let's talk about the part that everyone really wants to know. What have scientists actually found in real people with Parkinson's? And here's where I want to be completely honest with you because honesty builds trust, and trust is everything in this community. Human research on intermittent fasting in Parkinson's is still very early. Now, we're talking small studies, short studies, and studies that focus more on whether fasting is possible for people with Parkinson's, not on whether it slows progression or impacts motor symptoms. But even with that, there are some interesting clues to talk about. And leading it off with feasibility studies. Can people with Parkinson's even do intermittent fasting? There were several small pilot studies that have looked at whether people with Parkinson's can safely follow a fasting schedule. And here's what they found. Most participants were able to follow 12 to 14-hour fasting windows without major issues. People reported feeling lighter, less bloated, and sometimes more mentally clear. A few people struggled with medication timing, especially those who need food with their medications. Some experienced fatigue or lightheadedness early on. So, in simple terms, yes, fasting is doable for many people with Parkinson's, but it's not effortless and it's not for everyone. These studies weren't designed to measure long-term benefits, but they did show that mild fasting patterns are generally safe when supervised. And that's the key that you need to talk to your doctor about if you're even considering it. Weight, metabolism, and blood sugar. Now, there were a few human studies, and here's the key, that they weren't always with Parkinson's specific patients, but in general, they looked at how fasting affects things like blood sugar, insulin sensitivity, body weight, and cholesterol. Now, these are important because metabolic health plays a big role in brain health. And here's what they found. Time-restricted eating like 12-12 or 14-10 can improve blood sugar control. It may help reduce insulin resistance, which is linked to inflammation. Some people lose weight, which can be good or bad depending on the person, and cholesterol and triglycerides may improve. Now, for people with Parkinson's, this matters because better metabolic health equals less inflammation. Less inflammation equals potentially less stress on neurons. But again, these are indirect benefits, not Parkinson's-specific outcomes. Okay, let's look at intermittent fasting and non-motor symptoms. Some small human studies and observational reports suggest fasting may, and again, that's the key word, may help with constipation because the gut gets to rest, sleep quality, especially when people stop eating late at night before bed, energy levels, and mental clarity. Now, these weren't huge clinical trials. They're just early signals. So in short, fasting may help some of the day-to-day symptoms that make Parkinson's harder, not by curing anything, but by giving the body a little more rhythm and rest. All right, now let's look at the medication challenges with fasting. And this is one of the biggest concerns in human studies. Many Parkinson's medications, especially levodopa, work better when they're not taken with protein, but they often need to be taken with food to prevent nausea. Human studies consistently show people who take meds with food may struggle with longer fasting windows. People who take meds on an empty stomach may feel nauseous, and medication schedules often dictate eating schedules. This is why strict fasting windows like 16-8 or 18-6 are not usually recommended for people with Parkinson's unless a doctor is closely involved. So, to sum up, your medication schedule comes first. Fasting has to fit around your medications and not the other way around. All right, now let's look at the big picture. Does intermittent fasting help slow Parkinson's progression? Well, there are no human studies that have shown that fasting slows Parkinson's progression. Now, this is important. Animal studies are exciting, cell studies are exciting, and mechanisms are exciting. But in humans, no study has shown that fasting slows progression. No study has shown it protects dopamine neurons. And no study has shown that it reduces motor symptoms long term in humans. So when we talk about human studies, the message is simple. We're still early, we're still learning. But the early signs are promising enough that mild, safe fasting like 12-hour overnight fast might be worth exploring with your doctor. Now, I did want to share that a newer abstract study that was published March 18th, 2024 at heart.org, and it was titled 8-Hour Time Restricted Eating Linked to a 91% Higher Risk of Cardiovascular Death. Now, I haven't found that if this has been published yet in a peer-reviewed journal. The study of over 20,000 adults found that those who followed an 8-hour time-restricted eating schedule, a type of intermittent fasting, had a 91% higher risk of death from cardiovascular disease compared to a standard schedule of eating across 12 to 16 hours per day. Limiting food intake to less than 8 hours per day was not associated with living longer. All right, so let's try to summarize this in terms of what it means for you. The potential benefits of intermittent fasting include better metabolic health, reduced inflammation, and possible brain protective effects, and improved gut rest, which is helpful for constipation. Now, the potential risks of intermittent fasting include medication timing challenges, low blood sugar, dizziness or fatigue, unwanted weight loss, and potentially dehydration, which is huge in Parkinson's. So we want to prevent dehydration. So who should definitely avoid intermittent fasting? Anyone with advanced stage PD, people who struggle with weight loss, those with heart disease, based on the abstract that I just referenced, and people whose medication schedules are tied to food. Okay, here's how to explore intermittent fasting gently and safely. Step 1, which is non-negotiable, is to get approval from your doctor to make sure it is something that is appropriate for you. If your doctor agrees, start with awareness. So before you change anything, simply observe. When do you eat your first meal? When do you stop eating at night? How often do you snack? Awareness alone can improve habits. Step 2, begin with the easiest pattern, 12-12. This means 12 hours of eating and 12 hours of fasting. For example, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. eating window. This is safe for most people, but get your doctor's approval first. And it aligns with the natural circadian rhythm. Now, if that works and you want to try 14-10, this is still gentle and avoids the risks seen in the 8-hour eating window research. Next, hydrate like it's your job. Water, herbal tea, electrolytes, bone broth, so that you don't become dehydrated, which can lead to other issues. Then, protect your medication schedule, and this is critical. If your meds require food, then fasting may not be appropriate. Finally, stop immediately and eat if you notice dizziness, weakness, confusion, worsening of balance, and unintended weight loss. It's important to let your doctor know what type of fasting you're doing. So if you get approval for 12-12 from your doctor and it's something you want to try, don't jump to other times without their approval. Now here's the truth. Intermittent fasting and time-restricted eating are interesting, promising, and worth watching, but they're not magic bullets. The science is early, the risks are real, and your safety always comes first. But here's what I know after living with Parkinson's for 15 years. Small, consistent habits, the ones you can sustain like exercise and good nutrition, are what truly move the needle. So whether it's eating earlier, sleeping better, walking daily, or connecting with others, you have more influence over your journey than you realize. Now, if you found this helpful, I'd love for you to visit liveparkinsons.com and subscribe to the free monthly newsletter and listen to more episodes on this podcast and share with others who could benefit. I really appreciate you listening. Stay strong, stay healthy, and live your best life with Parkinson's. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.